Okay, we're moving on to part 3 of chapter 4. We're going to trace our way through the digestive tract, starting in the mouth and esophagus, and working our way through, tracing the path of food, talking about digestion and absorption in a little bit more detail, even though we've already alluded to this in the first video. So food preparation starts digestion outside of the body. So if you are cutting up food into smaller pieces, if you're pounding food, like pounding chicken before you grill it, even marinating and then cooking itself, those are all types of food preparation. And that is kind of breaking down the food or breaking down parts of the food before you even ingest it. Once inside the body, digestion is going to start in your mouth. Okay, and so you have teeth, which are going to chew, or we can call this mastication. So teeth tear through or grind food into smaller pieces. You have saliva that's produced in your mouth by your salivary glands, and that saliva contains chemicals that are going to mix with food particles, begin to break it down, and it creates something called the bolus. This is a mass of food that you will eventually swallow. Inside of this saliva that mixes with food to form this bolus is going to be mucus. Mucus helps to lubricate this food and hold that food together. It also contains an enzyme called lysozyme. That lysozyme is going to start to kill bacteria. And a couple of enzymes involved in the beginning of digestion. So we have salivary amylase. Remember amylase from the first video? When you think of amylase, I want you to think of carbohydrates. So salivary amylase is produced in the mouth. It's part of saliva. And it's going to begin the breakdown of carbohydrates. And then we have lingual lipase. So lipase, remember, is fats. And so again, fat digestion will be initiated in the mouth as well. And saliva contains minerals and other substances to neutralize acid and protect your teeth. Okay, so let's take a look in our mouths. And so you can, obviously, you know what teeth are, right? Below the bottom of your mouth, so right underneath that tongue, you have salivary glands. So you've got submandibular salivary glands. You've got sublingual salivary glands. So the glands are this yellowy substance here, and that the saliva will be delivered into the mouth via ducts. Okay. There are also salivary glands in this region. Okay, kind of the back part of your cheek near your ear. And again, here is a duct. A duct is it's a tube in which that saliva can flow from. So you've got multiple salivary glands in your mouth. Okay. Smell and taste. Saliva also, it enhances our perception of flavor by dissolving taste-forming compounds in foods, which can be picked up by taste receptors found in your taste buds, which are, again, in your mouth. You have 5 basic tastes: salty, sour, sweet, bitter, and umami, which is savory. Those 5 tastes can be enhanced by what are called your olfactory cells, which are found in your nose. So they're involved in smelling. So taste can be enhanced through your sense of smell. So after food begins, again, to mix with mucus, we form the bolus. You got some salivary enzymes that begin digestion in the mouth. The food is now going to move from your mouth to your stomach. And so in order to do that, you have to swallow. So swallowing moves food from your mouth to your esophagus. The esophagus is the tube that is going to deliver food from your mouth to your stomach. There is a structure called the epiglottis in the back of your throat, found at the entrance to the esophagus, and its job is to prevent food from entering the trachea. Okay, your trachea is your windpipe. It is another tube which extends from the back of your mouth, your throat region, into your lungs. Okay, and obviously we don't want food in our respiratory tract and in our lungs. And so when food is swallowed, when this bolus is swallowed, this structure called the epiglottis is going to tip back, and it's going to cover what's called the larynx. When that happens, the esophagus relaxes and it opens, which is going to allow food to enter it. And so on the next slide here, we've got a picture of this. So again, you have your mouth region, okay? And this yellow structure here, this is the bolus. So again, this is food that has started to become mechanically digested. A little bit of chemical digestion is happening here as well. It's mixed with saliva and mucus. And so we have this compacted food called the bolus. What's going to happen when you swallow is that this structure right here, the epiglottis, is going to tip back and cover the larynx. And so the trachea here, the larynx is going to be covered, and so food cannot enter into the trachea. Okay, so that's what's being shown here. The epiglottis tips back, closes the larynx. So as the food moves, now it can't enter into your trachea. Instead, it's going to enter into the esophagus. So the esophagus is this tube behind your trachea. And the bolus you can see here continues to move. After you're done swallowing, the epiglottis raises back up. And so your windpipe, your trachea is opened back up for breathing. Okay, so that structure again is called the epiglottis. On to 4.4. So we've gone from the mouth, the bolus is going to enter the esophagus, and next it's going to go to the stomach. So let's talk about that. The entry of food into the stomach is controlled by a structure called the lower esophageal sphincter, which is also known as the cardiac sphincter, sometimes referred to. And so that's this structure right here. You can see the opening in the center. So remember we talked about sphincters in the last video. Sphincter is a circular muscle which can open and close. And all of your sphincters are going to be under involuntary control except for your anal sphincter. That is under voluntary control. So this sphincter here, the lower esophageal sphincter, is going to be at the base of your esophagus where the esophagus meets the stomach. And the job of this sphincter is to prevent backflow of the acidic contents inside of our stomachs back up into the esophagus. When the lower esophageal sphincter malfunctions, that's when we get kind of splashing back up of those stomach acids into the esophagus, and that's known as heartburn. And we're going to talk about this towards the end of the chapter. You may have also heard of GERD, which we'll talk about. So once inside the stomach functions as a holding and a mixing tank for our food. There is some digestion that occurs here, mechanical. So we have this, what's called churning. So smooth muscles are going to kind of mix the food up. And then there is some digestion of water, some fats, and about 20% of alcohol can get absorbed through the stomach wall. But again, in general, there is little digestion and very little absorption. Except for alcohol, I guess 20% is not too little. Okay, so the stomach is going to secrete gastric juices. Okay, those are going to aid in the digestive process. We're talking about chemical digestion now. Anytime we see, smell, taste, or think about food, these gastric juices get released. What's in these gastric juices? So there's hydrochloric acid, which again is HCl. Though the hydrochloric acid is going to get released from parietal cells. So if I come over here to this figure, here's my stomach. The very inside would be the lumen, right, the opening. It's surrounded by muscle layer. You've got a submucosa, and then on top you've got this mucosal layer. And in here, you can see the parietal cells right here. I believe they're in blue. This is kind of difficult to see. So they're lining these gastric pits. Okay, so there are these folds in the epithelial membrane in the stomach, and some of these cells, parietal cells, are going to secrete hydrochloric acid. We're going to talk about the role of hydrochloric acid in just a minute. There is also a substance called pepsinogen that gets released. Pepsinogen actually gets activated by hydrochloric acid into a protein digesting enzyme. But right now, pepsinogen in this form would be inactive. Gastric lipase is also released. So lipase, you should be thinking fat digestion. Gastric tells you stomach. From specific cells called chief cells. And so again, if I come over here, the chief cells are over here in purple. And so again, just like the parietal cells, they're kind of lining those gastric pits. Okay, and then there's a hormone called gastrin, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a couple of slides, that controls the release of hydrochloric acid and pepsinogen. So again, the digestive system and the endocrine system are connected here. The digestive system and the muscular system are connected here. So you can see how body systems work together. Okay, so let's talk about hydrochloric acid. Again, hydrochloric acid is produced by parietal cells found in the inner lining of the stomach. What is its job? It's going to inactivate biologically active ingested proteins. So as you're eating food, the food may contain active proteins. You don't want those proteins to be active inside of you. So HCl will inactivate those proteins. Hydrochloric acid also will kill any bacteria or viruses that enter into your digestive system. Hydrochloric acid can also dissolve dietary minerals, making them more easily absorbed. And it will, like I said before on the previous slide, it converts pepsinogen into an active enzyme, which is called pepsin. And so protein digestion can begin once that happens. Okay. The stomach also secretes mucus from mucus cells. This mucus is really important because it's going to lubricate and protect the inner lining of your stomach from being digested by the HCl and pepsin that's produced in the stomach. Okay, so it has to protect itself. This mucus production relies heavily on what are called prostaglandins. These are hormone-like substances. They're not actually hormones, but they're hormone-like substances. The use of aspirin and other non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs can inhibit prostaglandin production. So if you take a lot of these drugs, prostaglandin production is inhibited, and so therefore mucus production is inhibited. Now, if mucus production is inhibited, then that inner lining of your stomach is not being coated and protected. That could lead to peptic ulcers, which we're going to talk about towards the end of the chapter. It's one of the causes of peptic ulcers. Okay. All right. So food is in the stomach. There is some chemical digestion that's happening. There's also some mechanical digestion that's going to happen. So there are, again, smooth muscle surrounding the stomach, and it can contract, it will contract, and that contraction is going to cause churning. And that churning, again, is a form of mechanical digestion, and it's going to thoroughly mix food with all of those gastric secretions. So making sure that food sees the gastric lipase and the hydrochloric acid and the pepsin. Okay. In the stomach, the bolus, which enters, is going to be transformed into what's called chyme. Okay, so we're no longer have this solid structure of food. It's now going to be this soupy acidic mixture. And again, we call it chyme. The second sphincter, called the pyloric sphincter, okay, so we talked about the esophageal sphincter between the esophagus and the stomach. The pyloric sphincter is going to be in between the stomach and the small intestine. So the very beginning of the small intestine, again, is called the duodenum. And this pyloric sphincter is going to come in between the stomach and the duodenum, or duodenum, whatever, however you want to say it. That sphincter is going to control the flow of chyme from stomach into the small intestine. And it's going to also prevent the backflow of stuff in the small intestine into the stomach, including bile, okay, which bile is produced by the liver, and it goes into the small intestine, and we don't want bile to come back up, into our stomach. There is a hormone, and we're actually there's a whole slide of showing a bunch of different hormones. This is one of them that will be on there. There's a hormone called glucose-dependent insulotropic peptide. This hormone helps to slow the release of chyme into the small intestine, which gives the small intestine time to neutralize acids and begin to digest nutrients. We'll talk about this as well, there is a substance produced by the pancreas called bicarbonate, which is involved in neutralizing that acidity. So the stomach is an acidic environment because of hydrochloric acid, but the small intestine is not an acidic environment, and that acid could damage the small intestine. So we have to make sure that we neutralize the acid. Stomach also produces something called intrinsic factor. Intrinsic factor is needed for the absorption of vitamin B12, which happens in the small intestine. And the stomach also produces a hormone called ghrelin. And ghrelin plays a key role in regulating appetite. Ghrelin will increase before a meal, so increase your appetite, and then the levels of ghrelin hormone will decrease after, making you feel not hungry after you've had a meal. Okay, so both of those are also produced by the stomach. And so now we're going to move into the small intestine. So we'll continue on to 4.5. And so here we're going to talk about the small intestine, and we'll also talk about the accessory organs, which include the liver, the pancreas, and the gallbladder. The small intestine is going to be the major site of digestion and absorption. Okay, so this is really the site where most of that is going to be happening. Some digestion occurs in the mouth, some digestion occurs in the stomach, but most of it occurs in the small intestine. It's divided into 3 sections. And so here we go on our figure. Here's the stomach up here. This would be where the pyloric sphincter is, which again is going to control the movement of food from the stomach into the small intestine. The small intestine starts with the duodenum. That's going to be the first section here. That's about 10 inches long. And then that is going to lead into the jejunum, which is the second section of the small intestines, okay, in this area here. That's about 4 feet long. And then the intestine will end down here with the ileum, which is about 5 feet long, okay? And then the ileum will empty contents into the large intestine, and we're not here yet, but just as a precursor to it, the next valve is called the ileocecal valve, and that's going to separate the small intestine from the large intestine. Okay. The small intestine is definitely not short, right? It's long. It's over 9 feet long if we were to kind of stretch it out, but it's narrow. So it's only about 1 inch in diameter, which is why it's called the small intestine. Okay. Okay. So let's talk about some of the structures. If we were to look at the inner lining of the small intestine, so we're talking about where the epithelium is, the inner lining of the small intestine is going to have these folds, call them circular folds, and finger-like projections, okay? Those finger-like projections are called microvilli. So the folds are villi, and the finger-like projections are called microvilli. Why is the epidermis here folded this way? It's to increase surface area. So the more surface you have in the small intestine, the more digestion and absorption can occur here in this organ. Okay. These circular folds cause chyme to move slowly through a spiral path. It helps mix the chyme with the digestive juices that are going to be secreted either by the epithelium or by accessory organs. And it's going to bring nutrients into contact with the villi, again, enhancing absorption. So it's going to enhance both digestion and absorption. Okay. There is also something called segmentation, which involves, again, the muscle, the smooth muscle surrounding the small intestine. And that segmentation, we saw that on a slide back in the beginning of the chapter, is a form of mechanical digestion. Again, it kind of moves food back and forth, food and, well, I should say chyme, and the juices that are produced in the small intestine. It's going to cause those to mix, kind of move back and forth and mix. So we're breaking up food and we're mixing the chyme with all of the digestive juices. The villi are going to be lined with these cells called enterocytes. These enterocytes are going to secrete enzymes, which are going to be involved in digestion, and these enterocytes are also involved in absorption. Okay. There will be other cells that also secrete mucus as well as hormones. Talk about more of those. So the enterocytes, they're going to be kind of lining the microvilli, and we call this structure the brush border. These cells, these enterocytes, this brush border, are covered with digestive enzyme containing, we call it the glycocalyx. It's this coating on the cells. This brush border is going to be involved in the digestion of macronutrients, mainly proteins and carbohydrates. Okay? When we talk about digestion in the small intestines, it really is going to happen in the upper portion, the beginning portion of the small intestine. So really in the duodenum and the upper jejunum. There's not really digestion in the ileum. Okay? Digestion in these regions depends on secretions from enterocytes, so from the small intestine itself. So those brush border enzymes, again, are going to be produced. They are going to digest all of the macronutrients. But we also have secretions from the accessory organs. So the pancreas, we're going to see pancreatic amylase, lipase, and protease. So again, carbohydrates, lipids, proteins. The liver and gallbladder. The liver is going to produce bile, and the bile gets stored in the gallbladder and then delivered to the small intestine. And we'll talk about what bile does in just a second. Okay. Well, let me just show you the structure. I want to remind you of this. So again, we've done the mouth and the esophagus. The stomach is in this light pink here. Sitting kind of above the stomach in a very large organ is your liver, which again is going to be responsible for the production of bile. Near your stomach, above your intestine, is going to be this. It looks like kind of like a honeycomb yellow structure. This is going to be your pancreas. And then sitting underneath the liver, I think it appears green here, that's going to be your gallbladder. Okay, and again, we'll talk more about this as accessory organs in just a second. Your small intestine is packaged right in here. Okay. Remember, the beginning is going to be called the duodenum, and then we have the jejunum, and then the ileum. When we talk about digestion, it's going to be in those first two parts. Okay, so here we go. Here's the pancreas. Here is the intestine, right? So the duodenum, and then this part right here starts the jejunum. Okay, we're not showing the stomach on here or the pyloric sphincter. If we were to take the small intestine here and kind of break it open so that we could see inside, we can see that there's layers. Right here's the muscle layers, so the longitudinal muscle and the circular muscle, both of those are involved in mechanical digestion, segmentation. If we go farther in, we see a submucosa and then the epithelium. and we can see these circular folds, okay? And so if I were to blow this up and look at just that, the inner layer, that epithelium, I'm going to see, these circular folds up close here, magnified. And so what you can see here are villi, so these finger-like projections. Okay, again, why? Why does the epithelium get folded in this manner? To increase surface area. The more surface area, the more digestion and absorption can take place. Before I look at the cells here, let me just bring you to here. So we have our epithelial layer. If I look underneath, so kind of within the finger-like projection, this is the tissue underneath the epithelium here, you can see that there is, where's my pointer? There is both a capillary network, so there's a blood supply, and there is also a lymphatic, lacteals, so these are lymph vessels. And so having blood vessels and lymph vessels is going to ensure that absorption can take place and nutrients can get to where they need to get to. Okay, so that's what that blood and lymph is for. So if I were to blow up one of these finger-like projections, so one villus of the villi, again, I can see the lymph shown here in blue and red capillary beds. Okay, so I have a blood and lymph supply, which again is going to aid in absorption here. I also have lining the villus microvilli. And so if I were to just pick one of these epithelial cells and blow it up, that's here. And you can see all of these little projections here. These are the microvilli, which are part of what's called the brush border. This brush border, again, is going to be a region where there's a ton of brush border enzymes. Okay, so enzymes involved in digestion. Okay, so we've got digestion and we've got absorption happening in these regions. Okay, I've mentioned this already, but let's make sure we got it. There are accessory organs that are going to produce enzymes and other molecules that are important in digestion. And so that's going to include the liver, which makes bile, the gallbladder, which stores and concentrates bile, and the pancreas, which produces a couple of different things. Those accessory organs are going to dump their contents really into the small intestines. And how do they do that? So there is going to be a tube called the common bile duct that goes from the gallbladder to the small intestine. And then there is a pancreatic duct that goes from the pancreas to the small intestine. And so those two ducts come together at a structure called the hepatopancreatic sphincter. Sometimes it's referred to as the sphincter of Oddi. And then when they come together, that sphincter is going to lead into the beginning of the small intestine, the duodenum. And if I actually, oh no, it's on the next slide. Let me go forward a slide. This picture is actually nicer, it's bigger. So here's the liver, okay? Underneath is the gallbladder. And so there is this duct from the liver and the gallbladder actually, called the common bile duct, and green. And so that's going to lead right here to here. And this structure right here is the pancreas. And you can see that there's this pancreatic duct. Okay, so all the secretions produced by the pancreas flow into the pancreatic duct. And the pancreatic duct and the common bile duct meet right here. And there is going to be this structure right here, this muscular structure, again called the hepatopancreatic sphincter, that is going to control the flow of bile and pancreatic secretions into the small intestine, which at the very beginning here again is called the duodenum. There's another sphincter. Okay. Going forward instead of backwards. Okay, here we go. So again, we've talked about this a few times, but let's make sure we have it. The liver produces bile. Okay, what is bile? Bile is a yellow-greenish fluid that's involved in the digestion and absorption of fats. It contains cholesterol. It emulsifies fats, which means it breaks fats down into smaller particles, into tiny fat droplets. The gallbladder, our second accessory organ that sits right underneath that liver, It's going to be responsible for storing and concentrating bile until it's needed. There are individuals who have had their gallbladders removed, and so therefore the common bile duct just connects the liver to the small intestine, and there is no storage of bile. Okay, so bile will enter into the upper part there, the duodenum of the small intestine. It does its job, and then actually in the last part of the small intestine, the ileum actually reabsorbs the bile and returns that bile to the liver. Most of it. So this is recycling of bile. It's called the enterohepatic circulation. Okay, so that's bile going from the liver to the small intestine back to the liver. A small amount of that bile is not going to be reabsorbed, and it gets excreted with feces. That is how cholesterol gets removed from the body. Okay, back to the pancreas. And again, we've mentioned this, but let's make sure we have it. The pancreas produces pancreatic juices. In those juices, these are the things that are found. So sodium bicarbonate. This is the substance responsible for neutralizing stomach acids. So again, chyme coming from the stomach is acidic because of that hydrochloric acid. The small intestine is an organ that is not acidic, and so that chyme needs to be neutralized. There is also pancreatic amylase, which digests carbohydrates, pancreatic lipase for fats, and pancreatic proteases for proteins. Okay. Okay. We know that the work of the digestive system requires regulation and coordination. And so here is a list of 5 key hormones that are involved in regulation. And actually, I'm going to go right to the next slide because they're explained in the table a little bit better. Okay. So we've talked about some of these already. So ghrelin, we said, it's the appetite hormone. Gastrin is produced by the stomach and the upper part of that, the small intestine. It's going to trigger the release of hydrochloric acid and pepsinogen. We then have CCK, cholecytokinin, produced in the small intestine. In response to dietary fat and chyme, which is going to stimulate the release of pancreatic enzymes, lipases, as well as bile from the gallbladder so that fat can be digested. Secretin comes from the small intestine in response to acidic chyme. It stimulates the release of bicarbonate from the pancreas to neutralize that acid. Motilin helps to regulate the movement of food through the gastrointestinal tract. We talked about this one already briefly. Glucose-dependent insulotropic peptide, or GIP. It's released by the small intestine. It inhibits gastric acid secretion. Peptide YY, I'll mention this one. This is produced in the ileum and in the large intestine in response to fat. It inhibits gastric and pancreatic secretions. And then somatostatin. This is produced in the stomach, small intestine, and pancreas. It inhibits the release of other GI hormones, slows gastric emptying, slows the movement of food through the gastrointestinal tract, and it increases blood flow to the intestine. Okay. So again, the digestive system, and the endocrine system, and the nervous system, and our musculoskeletal system, they're all working together. Okay, this is a small list of hormones. I don't want to overburden you with hormones, and again, I don't expect you to memorize them. I've said this before, most nutrient absorption occurs in the small intestine. So about 95% of the ingested proteins, carbohydrates, fats, and alcohols get absorbed in the small intestines. There is little absorption in the stomach. And again, same thing in the large intestine. In the stomach, we've already talked about alcohol. About 20% of all alcohol consumed gets absorbed by the stomach. Small intestine, you know, proteins, carbohydrates, fats, alcohols, vitamins, minerals, they're all going to be absorbed in the small intestine. We're going to get to the large intestine in the next video. Okay, and I just briefly want to go over absorption. So when nutrients get absorbed, again, they have to move from the inside hollowed out region, the lumen of whatever organ we're talking about, small intestine here. They have to move through the wall, through the epithelial layer, and eventually make it into either the bloodstream or the lymphatic system. And so that can happen in 4 different ways. It could be passive diffusion, okay? And so in passive diffusion, we're moving nutrients from one area to another down a concentration gradient. So from where there's a lot of some nutrient to where there's only a little bit of some nutrient. So from high to low. Passive diffusion doesn't require any external energy. Facilitated diffusion is like passive diffusion in that molecules, nutrients are still being moved from high to low without energy, but they can't just move across on their own. Instead, they require what's called a transport or a carrier protein. Okay, and then the other two, so active transport and endocytosis, both of these require energy. Active transport also requires a carrier protein, so a protein has to pick up whatever contents is being moved and actually change shape and dump it off on the other side. In this case, we're going to move substances from low to high against a concentration gradient. And endocytosis, which is also going to require energy, there's a couple of different kinds. There is phagocytosis, which is the engulfment of compounds, and then there is pinocytosis, which is the engulfment of liquids. So the next slide just has a really quick summary picture of this. So this would be the lumen here of our small intestine. And then this is going to be the plasma membrane of an absorptive cell. And this is the inside of that absorptive cell. And so in number 1, we're showing passive transport. So if we look at the green dots, you can see that there's more green dots. There's 2, 4, there's 5 green dots, whatever nutrient this is. Let's say it's carbohydrates, right? There's 5 glucose molecules on this side. And on the inside of the cell, there's only 2. And so the glucose is going to move from high to low, down the concentration gradient, and it's not going to require energy. This is facilitated transport. So same thing, molecules are going to move from high to low. There was just 3 of them here, and 2. This one's moving in. They're going to move from high to low, but they can't move across the membrane by themselves. So they require this big purple thing, which is a transport protein. Active transport is shown here. So you can see if we're looking at these half circle red things, whatever nutrient this is, there's 4 of them here and 2 of them here. And we're moving them from the lumen again, the lumen to the inside of the cell. So this is going to require energy and a transport protein. So this big gold thing is a transport protein. It's going to pick up whatever nutrient this is on the lumen side of the cell. It's going to change shape and dump its contents off on this side of the cell. Okay. And then for number 4, these orange things are, whatever nutrient compound, and they're going to be taken in by phagocytosis, and this is just showing maybe water, liquid, being taken up through pinocytosis. Again, this requires energy as well. Okay, so that's how absorption happens. It can happen by a few different ways. It could be passive or active, so doesn't require energy, does require energy. And in passive transport, we can have just basic passive transport or facilitated. And then in active transport, we could have just basic active transport or endocytosis. Okay, so that is the end of that part. The next part we'll be moving on to 4.6. We'll talk about how nutrients are circulated through the body and also the large intestine. So what happens after nutrients are absorbed, and then what happens to stuff that's not broken down.